things that we have interpreted in the Bible, in other Gospels, and in the writings that we see through our own eyes. After seeing the words, we think, okay, dog means dog, but it doesn't. In the Bible, there were like 6 different words for dog. There was a lap dog, and there was a working dog, and there was a wild dog. There was a dog that was called a cur. That was a dog who was not a pet, but he lived inside of the community. That was one of the representations that we can misinterpret, because when we think, as Western people, of a dog, we think of a pet. We think of someone who goes into burning buildings and helps, find people in demolished structures, and we think of, heroic dogs, not the different kinds that they did. So we've narrowed the definition that they had into something much more constrained. There are many things that we see as being very clear-cut, but you have to understand that, bless their hearts, all those little students in the monasteries were copying by candlelight, by hand, the Bible and the Gospels. And as a result, many of the times the focus was more on something called illumination, which is making the first letters pretty, decorating the pages to glorify God. Sometimes there were small spelling errors that crept in. This happens everywhere. But the thing is that when you think of a gospel as being inviolate, protected by God to stay exactly the same throughout history, you're buying into a myth. This is not how the Bible was rewritten. Then that brings us back to, how was the Bible written in the first place? To understand this, you have to go back a little bit further and understand that one of the things that happened was that every apostle, and there were 12 of them that he chose. There were no more afterwards, no matter how much the Bible says that they chose more later. No more were chosen. The 12 that studied directly, in person, with Jesus, were apostles. Each of these people, these human beings, these fallible individuals, had an image in their head and remembrances of stories of what Jesus said. Now, many times they concurred and they were very close, but at the same time, if you tell a dozen people separately, I'm going to the store to buy buttermilk because I love ice cream, with butter sauce, and I need the buttermilk to buy it. Every one of them is going to remember something different about what you said. I remember in school they had this pass-along game. What you did is you told your friend, I just jumped rope 15 times, pass it on. By the time you got to the end of the line, 10 or 12 kids later, it didn't sound anything like jump rope. The number may have been changed, and the person who was doing it may have been changed. So you can see every time that something gets verbally repeated, it can be changed. Making it a faith issue often makes things more rote, which takes the heart out of it, but it makes it more transferable in a verbal tradition. Most of Christianity in the first 200 years were verbal traditions and were never written down, which means that the original apostles basically didn't write anything. As a result, this caused some major contentions between the different followers of different apostles, because each one of them started going down the road that each of the apostles had sent them. basic ideas stayed the same. There was an individual called Jesus. He was the Son of God. He suffered and died for us, and he rose from the dead. Those seem to sort of stick with all the apostles, but a lot of the details changed. One of the things that happened was that two of the apostles, the Apostle John and the Apostle Thomas, were in competition for members of their churches. The Apostle John is well known as the Gospel of John, as basically bad-mouthing the Apostle Thomas constantly. He was made into a doubter. He was made into someone who didn't believe anything unless it was shown to him. And that was a misrepresentation of the way that Thomas felt, at least the way we learned it. Because as you might understand by now, we are descendants and followers of the tradition that Thomas started. The reason why he wanted proof was more to test things the way Jesus told them to test things. Jesus did not say, believe everything anybody ever tells you. What he said is, there will be counterfeits out there. There will be fakes. There will be charlatans. And the only way you can find out who and what they are is to ask questions. Blind faith has never been part of the Church of Thomas. The people who write things down and say, okay, this is it. If you don't believe every single word in the shape and form and the way we interpret it, then you're wrong and you're going to hell. Jesus didn't say you have to jump through hoops. He said, follow me. The way the Church of Thomas sees this is by following his example. We are following him. And if he turned the other cheek, we're supposed to turn the other cheek. If we fought demons, if he fought demons, then we're going to fight demons. If he believed in dreams and visions, we're going to believe in dreams and visions. And we're going to use them too. We are going to understand that God continues to talk to us, and that just because the Messiah came and gave his message doesn't mean that our understanding can't mature. One of the things that the Church of Thomas feels very strongly about is, even when we write things down, we do not believe that they should be written in stone. You know, one interesting example of something that might actually be serving a good purpose by having been preserved away from the multiple copies that happened with the other Gospels was the Gospel of Thomas. It was probably copied no more than once or twice, and it was collected from verbal traditions. The manuscripts that have been found are very similar, and that's how they were able to verify that certain parts were, you know, the Gospel of Thomas. What was interesting about it was that for 2,000 years, basically, it had lain dormant. About 50 years ago, it was found by an Egyptian and sold piecemeal to collectors. But luckily, an archaeologist found out what was happening and managed to scarf up as many pieces as he could, and the missing pieces were able to be reinserted from the other documents that had been found in the past that were much more sketchy. This one was called the Gospel of Thomas, and its sayings were mind-blowing. When I read them for the very first time, one of the things that struck me is, if he had arrived as a modern person and said these things, we would have understood a great many of them.